Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast Series. This episode is titled Sourcing and Caring for Seasonal Bait, and this is part two of a two-part series with Ryan Glass, a recreational and commercial fisherman, a commercial fisherman that specializes in bait, and he works out of the Wilmington, Wrightsville Beach area. My name is Gary Hurley of Fisherman's Post, and Fisherman's Post has been serving the NC saltwater fishing community since 2003. We've been bringing you fishing reports, fishing tournaments, fishing schools, membership content, and now here in our latest and greatest effort, the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast Series, where we reach out to our captain and guide friends from up and down the North Carolina coast and ask them to share with us their thoughts, their insights on how to catch more fish more often. In this endeavor, I am joined by podcast co-host David Harden of Harden Creative Media.
Hello, Gary.
David, welcome back.
Hey, you too.
Here we are, and it's been a while. The holidays sort of gave us some distance. But I think we did the appropriate catch up, and I think we're now ready to start crushing podcasts again.
Talking more bait.
We got Ryan back again. This has only happened once before in the history of the podcast series. I had Luke Donay, who started talking about flounder and very quickly realized it was going to be a two-part series, and that is exactly what has happened here with Ryan Glass. Lots of great information about bait, and so seasonally, we're now going to talk about summer and in the fall.
Great. Well, before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. First up, Port City Signs and Graphics. Sabrina and the crew doing some great work all over the area.
Yeah, she was a fun guest for a holiday special too. I like that.
Yeah. Now, this is the part of the podcast where I show you two signs, Gary. You know the routine.
I do.
Okay.
I kept that retention from 2024.
Excellent.
Two signs.
I'm glad. Without notes. Okay, so two signs. You tell me which one was made by Port City Signs and Graphics.
All right, I'm ready.
Here's sign number one. Huge fight at seafood restaurant, battered fish everywhere.
Look at you. You found a seafood themed sign.
I know.
That was very
Look at
clever
that.
of you.
This, the internet is a wonderful place. Here's sign number two. We have a nice O'Brien Surface Company 3D. I believe also the sign actually is illuminated too. Not in the picture, but it does light up.
Not here in this moment.
It does light up.
That's even a good photo angle, man. They have a good photographer on staff.
They know what they're doing.
I like that.
They know what they're doing.
The blue and the clouds and the angle. Yeah, good work, man. Sabrina is great. She's already been at work for Fisherman's Post, like helping us create. This time it was some big, I don't know what they were on, like aluminum or something, but posters for the Raleigh Bass and Saltwater Expo.
Oh, cool.
Promoting the podcast, promoting our fishing schools, promoting our member content. So in addition to banners, which she does regular, and she's already done banners for us this year, she also does these big 2 by 3 foot posters, again, on like aluminum. So they're legit, man. They do not wear down.
Cool. They do great stuff. Next sponsor coming up is yourboatmoney.com and New Coast.
Yeah, man. That's our friend Scott Bradshaw. And he is everything marine finance, and he started that yourboatmoney.com, just really out of a passion for the industry and for just wanting to educate people. I again, as I've mentioned on the podcast, I like his style. I like that he's about education, and through education, he feels confident that he'll get his clients. He'll make money, he'll support his family, but he's, by my vantage point, going about it the right way.
Right on.
So he's got that going for him as well.
All right, cool. Well, next up, Marine Warehouse Center.
My friends at Marine Warehouse Center. Let me shine them after you show us the video.
All right, here we go.
Matt with Marine Warehouse, excited to give you guys a huge update. We're now carrying Seabourn and Spider boat line. Of course, we have the newest models of Carolina Skiff, Sailfish, Sea Chaser, and Pan Marine. With over 60 boats in stock at a Wilmington location, let's schedule a sea trial and let's get you on the water today.
Oh, my good friends.
Rocking.
They are going to get the Fisherman's Post boat here shortly, man. I got to get ahead of the rush. I got to get them in and say, do my winter service, do my tune-up. And then I always have a list of things I like them to touch on, just so I start the year with a used boat, a very used boat, but in great condition thanks to Marine Warehouse Center. And that's me plugging service. And as you also hear me talk about sales and parts, man,
They've got it all.
yeah, I'm not a part guy because I just like them doing the work.
Yeah, that's good. It's probably good for your boat that way too.
It's definitely good for my boat that way. It's good in many ways. And here we are in 2025 and Terrell is still up to what Terrell does. I kind of tried to suggest to him that a New Year's resolution, he would get away from doing these jokes, but he didn't. He looked at me like I was talking another language.
You can't stop him.
He's addicted, man. I mean, I wonder how big that guy's ego is around Marine Warehouse Center. Man, he probably just walks around waiting for someone to ask him, tell him a joke.
Substantial.
Probably. And this one, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give a little disclaimer before this one. We're going to find out who our podcast true fans are with this, Dave.
Okay.
Because I'm not 100% sure. I haven't told this one before.
Right.
I mean, hold on. I'm not 100% sure Terrell hasn't told this one before.
Right. Of course.
So if you're a super fan out there and you can call me out on this and identify the episode, the first person who does, what am I going to do? Send him a shirt or something?
Send him a fish.
But hopefully Terrell hasn't told me this joke before. So he calls me and you know what he says?
What's that?
That he was hanging out, having a drink at a bar, and then 3 conspiracy theorists walk into the bar. And you can't tell me that wasn't a coincidence.
I don't think I've heard that one before.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I don't think it's a repeat.
All right, good.
Great.
Well, there we go.
That's great.
2025.
Cool. Well, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, just contact the Fisherman's Post office and we will hook you up.
Yeah, man. And again, what we have here, if you are a fan of the podcast, if you want to support the podcast, then we encourage you to become a premium content member of Fisherman's Post. You'll get access to all podcasts 1 week prior to their public release. In addition, you'll also get access to what we call bonus podcast content, where we continue the conversation with the guests for like 12, 20 minutes, somewhere in there. And that is never released publicly. It's only released, behind the membership wall. And then, of course, you get access to our weekly fishing reports and forecasts, as well as the More Fish Library, which is a bunch of fishing school videos that we collect every year.
Sounds great. It's a bargain.
All right. Well, now, man, to get on with the main event, I'm going to bring back on Ryan Glass. And, if you notice, we're wearing different clothes. We didn't do this all in one night because we didn't know it was going to be a 2-part when we got into it. But Ryan Glass, a recreational and commercial fisherman, that specializes in bait, working mostly the Wilmington, Wrightsville Beach area, but he's been known to travel before. Ryan, welcome back for part 2 of seasonal bait.
Hey, Gary, it's nice to be back.
Well, man, we enjoyed you so much. We enjoyed your podcast, and we are going to continue the conversation. But even though this is part 2, rules don't change. We still have 2 questions.
Okay, hit me.
All right. Well, question number 1, you got to remind people, why should they listen to you talk about bait a second time?
I think this is we're just going to go through it again, but it's just the time and knowledge of over 20 years fishing and doing stuff recreationally, commercially. I mean, to me, it sounds easy, but like, a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, just help us out with a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So it's just time and knowledge on the water, and as opposed to other things.
All right. You still win that one. It's still a good answer. Now for question number 2, the first time, I took the low-hanging fruit and I used your nickname Simba to come up with question number 2. But no way would I do that a second time. And I mean that, actually. I'm not just joking. So now I'm going to focus on your last name. And I'm going to ask you, is glass, the thin glass, is it a solid, a liquid, or gas?
I'm going to have to be a solid.
You are not. It is none of the... It is an amorphous solid. So okay. This is real deal. Glass is an amorphous solid, a state between solid and liquid. Glass molecules are constantly moving. How about that?
That's science.
Thanks for helping me out there, Gary. I needed that.
You need more than that, Ryan.
Yeah.
But now let's get out of it. So, man, we're talking about as we move into summer, and I think we're going to talk about the much more abundance of finger mullet. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Tell me about what summer means to you.
So the switch over when the water temperature bumps up into about your into your 70s, you start seeing the finger mullet in in groups, and now they start out really small in the creeks. I start seeing them about the size of my thumb in massive groups. Move in the, like I said, late spring, early summer. We start seeing them, and they get real big real fast. Now we have two different types of mullet here around in our area here. We have the striped mullet, which is the ones that really get really big, and you see them jumping out of the water. They're also called cob mullet, jumping mullet, roe mullet. It's all the same. Popeye mullet, all the same. We get those, and then we get those are the ones that hang around, and then the white mullet are the ones that leave in the fall. Those ones head south, and those are the ones that we traditionally call finger mullet. And they're, like I said, they don't get anything bigger than about 6 inches. As far as 7 inches as far as they go, but the Popeye mullet get really big. Those are my two main ones for the summer. It's a large amount of food, and because of that, there's a large amount of fish, predators eating those guys. Okay, so let's talk with focusing more on the finger mullet. So from your vantage point, like, when is it? Is it a water temperature? When is it that they really start to show? And then how long after they show before a guy like me can expect to, like, get them in a cast net? They're not just going to be too small for the cast net. Yeah. That's the thing with the mullet is that they kind of really work really well when they're real small. They are good for a lot of species, for the trout, the drum, the flounder. They work really, really nice when they're small, but catching good sized mullet, you're gonna have to wait until, I'd say, probably about June or so. They don't move into the surf until, I'd say, into September. So around about June, all those mullet are sitting in the backwater. So you can find them in the inlets, you can find them in the backwaters, in the creeks, pretty much everywhere you look, you're going to see those mullet, because they make a lot of on top water. They make a lot of sign on top water, very easy to see. And like I said, normally there's a lot of activity around them when you do see them. They are my favorite bait for redfish in the late season, because that's what they're feeding. It's like bears eating salmon. That the redfish change their diet over that. Normally eat a lot of crustacean, but in the fall, in the summer, when the mullet show up, they gorge themselves on finger mullet in order to get, and it put enough weight on for the fall. But it's not their favorite food to eat, but it is an abundance of food, and it's easy for them to catch. Man, as far as finger mullet goes, what is their relationship to you as a commercial bait fisherman? So to me, that's the time of year where when they show up, I kind of wait for them to move from the backwater into the surf, just so it doesn't destroy my net. I will catch them recreationally in the backwater, but commercially, I wait until they move into the surf in order to catch them. They tend to be a lot less. You tend to catch a lot less other things with them, like small croaker, small pinfish. When you catch them in the surf, they're all the same size finger mullet. In the backwater, you might catch a mixed match of Popeye mullet, finger mullet, croakers, pinfish. So there's a problem with catching them in the middle of the summer. If you can just get out of the backwater and into some sandy spots, it will help you out a lot better. But it is the fish to fish with. Like I said, in the fall, it's the best bait for me, as far as like your predator fish, from your Spanish to your blues, red drum, trout, flounder, all eat that same bait. So it covers a large variety of fish. But you're never selling them live. You're going to sell them, again, their relationship to you financially is you sell them packaged. Yes, I sell them packaged. The finger mullet I'll sell packaged. And then the cob corn mullet, when we used to run that shop down at CB, we would get them and we would butterfly them and salt them. So the Popeye mullet we would salt and use for cut bait, and then the finger mullet I would package whole and then sell them to the shop in bags of 16 per bag. Pretty much what I would do. Okay. Now to go back to bait, as this conversation might be able to help someone, who is a recreational fisherman. So, I'm guessing that a lot of my guys that are watching this, have some days where catching bait, finger mullet is easy, and some days where they are struggling to get finger mullet. And I want to stay focused on finger mullet for this right now. Yeah. So for my weekend warrior or my guy that can be hot and cold as far as success with finger mullet, what advice do you got? You're right. You're going to get them where you can. It doesn't matter Yes, it does matter if it's a little bit if it's live or dead. Preferably if you can keep a fish or bait live, it's great. The next best bet is going to be fresh. So if you're only coming down and you only have a small window to catch some fish and some bait, then I would go ahead and save that bait. But it's all about how you look after that bait. You can't just throw them in a bucket and just say I'll deal with that when I get home. The better you look after that bait, the better it's going to look when you put it back on that hook. So to me, ice is your best friend in the summertime. Once you get the mullet, they go straight into ice. I try not to leave them around too long before they go into the ice, because otherwise, the longer you let them sit, they start to break down pretty fast. The heat is not good for the flesh of those mullets. So as soon as you can get them frozen and cold, the better being for the end product.
All right, but we're skipping a step. I wanted help just to catch them. I wanted help just to find them and be able to throw a cast net on them, and maybe only throw a cast net a couple of times versus 20 times.
Okay. I would find areas. So the areas that you're going to go into, you're going to go into the backwaters, areas that you can find a nice big sandy spots. You really don't want to be throwing your net on top of oysters. You can in a pinch if you need to, but it's at the end of the day, it's not worth it. So I'm looking for areas that are creek mouths that are coming out, dumping out into bigger water, real shallow stuff, and it's pretty easy. They make a pretty easy sign on the surface when finger mullet are pushing water. I call it nervous water. They sit on the water, and the current looks like current's going the other way. It takes a while, just like looking at sand fleas in the sand, watching finger mullet swim together. Once you see them, and you're not going to see just one or two together. You're going to see 30 or 40, 50 together. So they're going to be in pretty big groups. So they do leave a pretty big sign on top of the surface. Like I said, if I'm throwing a net and I'm on mullet in the backwater in the early summer, I'm trying to find areas with the big sandy banks, kind of where the killifish. I normally find them. I like nice big sandy spots, so that way I don't have to worry about when I throw my net tearing the bottom of the net up. That is a big problem in the backwater.
If you're on a boat and trying to catch the finger mullet, are you more apt to post up on the shoreline and wait for them to come to you? Yes. Or are you troller motoring kind of in search of?
If you've got a person on the boat that you can trust to drive the boat, then I would say you can throw it on the boat. But if not, posting up is very easy. It's just those mullet are going to cruise up and down the banks. They're not just going to sit in one spot. They have to move in order to breathe. So they've got to be swimming, constantly swimming. And so if you see them coming down the bank, you don't really want to drive the boat at them, because it's going to make them go down deep. If you just post up on the bank and just wait for them to come to you, they will swim straight to you. They're not they're not going to swim, all over the place. They kind of will stay together for the most part. So like I said, if you do have someone you can trust to drive the boat and you feel confident throwing the net on the boat, and that's great. But otherwise, posting up is about the best thing to do.
My next question is, again, I just imagine some people watching this, man, they just don't have as much time on the water as someone like you. Yeah. And so they might be putting the boat in the water Saturday morning for a day of fishing, but Saturday morning is high tide. Okay. Man, what if anything, can you do to overcome the challenges of high tide when it comes to catching finger mullet in a cast net?
So that is a tough one. There are certain places in the area that if you've got to find a sandbar at high tide, wherever there's a long sandbar, wherever there's a big sandy spot at high tide, that's where I normally post up. Or even at high tide, you will see the finger mullet and the mullet in the marsh and in the grass. But once again, if you throw your net in there, it's going to destroy your net, and they're going to get underneath it. You really need to look for those sandbars. If you do a little bit of work and go out at high tide, there are a couple spots around here that have pretty big sandbars, and it's pretty easy once you just post up there to wait for those mullet, because they will be in the same area. They will constantly move around. But I do look for the big sandy spots as opposed to trying to throw my net around the grass.
And is it a sandbar where there isn't much grass around? Because I just imagine if there's grass around, that's where they're going to be. But you're saying even if there's grass around, a sandbar can produce.
Yes. So sometimes what I'll look for is there might be a little bit of grass, and then there'll be a big sandy bar, and then the grass might start again. And in between those two spots, I will wait, because the mullet are going to swim between the grasses down that from one section to the next section. They're not just going to sit in the one area. They will move around, like I said, constantly. That is kind of their detriment. The mullet, they're not like the killifish who can just sit down in the sand and not move around. They have to swim around, and that leading to them, it's easy to catch them like that, because they're going to come at past you at some point. And luckily for us, around middle of the summertime, they're pretty thick. It's just, like you said earlier, it's about finding the mullet that are of the right size, and you're not getting your net ending up with 400 small little baby mullet in your net.
All right. Speaking of nets, what cast net or cast nets do you like to use inside? What cast net do you like to use when you're throwing for finger mullet in the surf?
There's lots of different types of nets, and people use all different types of things to throw a net. If you're going to buy a net, I would recommend buying something that you can use multiple times and for different situations. That Betts Nets makes a 6-foot net with 3/8 mesh with lead on the bottom. It's called an Old Salt. It's probably the best recreational net you'll find for what you want to do as far as a recreational fisherman goes for inside. I don't like a big net. You can start up with a 6-foot in the backwater. I throw a 7-foot net, and an Old Salt. And like I said, it's got lead at the bottom, no metal on the bottom. And then for the surf, I go a little bit bigger, just because the size of the mullet get bigger in the surf. I'm throwing on cob corn mullet and on big schools of finger mullet. So I like the net to be at least 8-foot or 9-foot net, but still 3/8 mesh.
And I mean, just to cover the basics, just to be thorough, letting that net go to the bottom and then sort of sliding it back to you.
Oh yes, yeah. You, like I said, most of the time when you're throwing the net for the mullet, I mean, most of the mullet, they're not like menhaden. They're going to be in really deep water. Most of the mullet you're throwing the net on are going to be in water that's about waist deep, maybe 4 feet or so at the deepest. And so it's not going to take long for that lead net to fall, as opposed to if you're on the boat trying to throw, trying to get all the way to the bottom. A lot of those mullet are going to be in shallow water.
And is it your experience that if I end up like gill netting some finger mullet, that they're hardy enough that I push them through the net, that I don't have to give up on them being live, that they're going to hold up? Or if you end up gill netting and pushing them through, then you might as well call those fresh mullet and not live mullet?
Oh, yeah, I'll get a couple of them out, and if I feel like I've gilled a couple in the net, like I'll just pop their heads off and just put them in a bucket. And sometimes I'll just use them for if we're catching a bunch of fish, or if I'm trying to get a bunch of chum slick to get going and a bunch of fish to start feeding, I'll use those. It just those regular pieces of bait, because once the fish start feeding, they really don't care if that fish is live or not. They just care that it's in the water in front of them. They're going to eat it. So sometimes I will keep a bunch of live, some dead in a bucket there, and we'll go through them, especially if we're just trying to check out a new area, or if we don't want to go through our live stuff, we'll use a little bit of live bait to get them going, and then keep them going with all that little the little dead ones. Whatever goes in the net generally makes it into the boat. We don't throw it back.
Okay, so my next question now, I'm going to transition into caring for the bait now that we've caught some finger mullet. And before I go to like fresh mullet on ice, I'm gonna try to ask this live question, but I don't know if you have an answer for it. Like, any way to tell people like what is too much live mullet in like a yellow flow troll, or what is too much yellow mullet in a in a live well on a boat? Is there any formula? Is there any way to help people understand when too much is too much and they're going to end up dying and you're doing yourself a disservice?
So it's kind of hard. I mean, every boat and every thing is different with as far as how much aeration goes into their live wells. But you can tell pretty quick if you dump a bunch of mullet in your live well, and they start getting a red nose, and they'll start swimming into the walls. If there's too many of them, you'll see them come up to the surface and almost like be gulping air on the surface. If you see that, you've got too many mullet in your live well. In the flow troll buckets and stuff like that, it's more so a space thing. It's not so much an oxygen thing, because you're getting plenty of oxygen from the water around you. It's more so a space thing. And if you have too many in your live troll, they generally don't. They're not as active when you put them on the hook. They end up being pretty lethargic. So there is a fine line between having too many mullet in that bait bucket and live well. So it's just you have to just play it by ear and take a look. So you can kind of see if your mullet is struggling in the live well, you need to kick a couple out. Otherwise, a lot of them will die.
Okay, now to go to caring for fresh bait that we're not worried about being live bait. Okay. And so you've already said that ice is your friend, especially in the summer months.
Yes.
Do I have to worry about either putting mullet directly on ice? Is it okay for them to be directly on ice? Is it better to put ice on top, ice underneath? And then lastly, do I also have to worry about them sitting in fresh water? Does it need to be ice and not ice water?
Okay, so the fresh water doesn't matter. So the way when I do it is that it's hard for me to carry ice around the whole time, and and not knowing how much mullet am I going to catch, how long it's going to take me to catch them. So what I'll do is that I will take some frozen blocks and put them in my coolers. And once I've caught the mullet, they go into the cooler that's nice and cold. And then as soon as I get home, I put them in an ice bath, which is fresh water, ice, and salt.
And so you run them through that,
yes.
And then pull them out and then bag them.
Yes, they sit in that wash, that mixture for about 6 hours. I like it to get nice and firm. Yes, you don't just want to drop them in. I like to at least 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours, until that mullet becomes kind of nice and a little bit tough. When I put my hand in there and I can feel that water's like bites your hand off when you put your hand in there. That's what I want. I want it so cold that it burns when you put your hand in. That's what.
And are you 6 hours is quite a bit of time. Are you re-icing?
No. So that once I get the slush mix going, that's it. It lasts. Sometimes it'll get so solid in there. It'll get so cold in there. I'll actually have to break the top open just to get him going again. Just because it'll freeze on the top if it gets pretty cold. Especially if I'm bagging mullet in the fall and I've left it the cooler outside. Like I said, it's just you've got to play with it a little bit, but that's the at least 4 to 6 hours, I'd say. If you any less than that, and the mullet's not going to get a good brine.
So I didn't do good in science class as part of the reason of being an English instructor, and so it is the addition of ice that creates the slush that gives the ice much more potential, like cold potential and cold staying power. It's the presence of ice that catalyzes it.
It's not the ice. It's the salt.
I mean, I meant to say salt. I don't know. I was thinking salt if I didn't say salt out. But it's adding salt to the ice and the water that really is what makes true thing happen for 4 to 6 hours.
Yes, makes the temperature crash. Like so, normally, if you're trying to make what I'm trying to do is trying to make that water frigid cold. And once I've got the ice packed on the fish, what I'll do is I'll take a 5-gallon bucket and I'll fill up about quarter way with regular salt, with regular fresh water. Then I'll add my salt to that until I've got a very, very, very briny salt mix. And then I'll dump that mixture over the ice. And I can hear the ice started to crack and starting to become like a slush type mix. And once I got that going, once I can move it around and make it pretty cold, it'll stay like that for a long time, for about, like I said, 4 to 6 hours at least.
Okay, man, let's transition to Cobb mullet, and because I could use some help with Cobb mullet. I'll tell you my experience with Cobb mullet is, I mean, I live on Howe Creek, but I feel like I only really see it in the colder, later fall. And while I can catch finger mullet pretty easily from the dock, I think I've caught Cobb mullet maybe twice from the dock. So help us find and catch them first, and then we'll talk about care.
But if I'm catching Cobb mullet, I'm going to catch them in the surf.
Okay.
Just that's just that it's just easier. They're in bigger schools. They're in bigger numbers. There's less hang-ups. And I do catch a couple Cobb mullet in the middle of like midsummer in the backwater. But it's not my target species. When I see those guys in the fall in the surf, I switch over. No matter what's going on, I will. Because if I see in the fall time, I'm looking for big groups of finger mullet, and I'll see big groups of finger mullet as I'm moving around. But if I see a big group of Cobb mullet, I'm going to drop everything, all the finger mullet. I'm going to stop doing whatever I'm doing to get those Cobb mullet, because the groups of Cobb mullet are not as nearly as prolific as the finger mullet. So if I see them, I definitely switch over right away. I don't stop.
Okay, so give me an idea of when we're talking that you're have the best chance for cod mullet from the surf? And then what is it that you see? Because again, you're talking to a group that might not be used to this. Okay. So what is it that you see that says cod mullet, not finger mullet, or just cod mullet in general?
So cod mullet are going to jump out of the water. Like you're going to see them like greyhounding a little bit out of the water. There's the old timies guys around here that would net a lot of mullet, especially in the river. They would say that there's a certain smell that comes with the mullet. If the school is really, really big, it's got a distinct smell. It smells, I know it sounds funny here, but it's got a oily, very oily smell. When I'm seeing cobcorn mullet in this in the water, in the surf, and around the inlets and stuff like that, the water is generally a different color. When I'm looking at finger mullet in the surf and in those same areas, I'm seeing a very silvery type fish swimming through the water. When I see cob mullet in the water, it's generally a dark mass, like an off-color brown color in the water, and all I've got to see is one of them hop out of the water just to tell me what it is. But by that time, I've already thrown the net most of the time. But the problem is that if you throw it on a group like that, you're not just going to catch 4 or 5 mullet. You're going to probably catch like 40 or 50, and best your net be pretty good, because they will destroy your net if your net's not strong enough or big enough. They will destroy your net.
Okay, so when I'm surf fishing, where I choose to surf from the shore makes a huge difference. Makes a huge difference. Is there certain beach ocean features that, I don't know, bring the cod mullet in close enough that you can more easily catch them from a cast net from the surf? Is there certainly they're inside the bar, they're not outside the bar that you're catching them. Is that correct?
Yes, they're inside the bar, and generally I do like to target the inlets because it does funnel them through those spots pretty easily. So I'm looking for those are the areas that if I'm looking for cod mullet and big groups of mullet in the fall time here, I do kind of hang around the pinch points, which are the inlets, because they have to come through there, and it is a narrow spot for them to move through there. So if I was surf fishing near the inlets, I would get all my stuff set up and then walk up to the inlet and then walk from the inlet back to my stuff just to take a look and see what's around before I start fishing. But if I'm targeting them, I definitely like to hang around the pinch points for the bigger mullet.
All right, so now let's talk about caring for the cod mullet. So first you tell me your system, because again, being commercial, it might be a little bit different than if you were just catching them recreationally. So for you commercially, what happens when you are bringing in 30 to 40 cod mullet?
So there's 2 ways I would go through this. I sell cod mullet whole, vacuum sealed to the shop. And then we would also sell butterflied mullet, which is we would take jumping mullet or cob mullet, we would scale it and then butterfly it and put it in a 5-gallon bucket. And what we do is we get at least 3 or 4 mullet and butterfly them and throw some salt down inside the 5-gallon bucket and put them their skin side down. And make sure you've got to scale them first before you do this. I would scale them, butterfly them, put them in the 5-gallon bucket, and then once you got them on a layer, I would layer a bunch of salt over the top of that. Then I would butterfly fillet 4 or 5 more Popeye mullet, stack them down on top, put the salt on top until you stacked all the way to the top of the 5-gallon bucket. Eventually, the salt will force the water out of the bucket, and we would seal the top of the bucket, and that's how we would sell a lot of salted mullet in the fall to surf fishermen like that. They'd come in, they're like salted mullet, like in the 5-gallon bucket. They'd reach in there, grab 2 or 3 fillets out, we'd weigh it up, charge them, and they'd walk out. But recreationally, it's an easy way to preserve your cut mullet is to salt it like that. Okay,
so a couple of follow-ups. First would be, why do you scale them? What's the difference there? What is the benefit?
It allows the salt to penetrate the fish. If you don't scale that mullet, the salt's not going to penetrate, and it's not going to cure the fish very well. It will rot that fish if that salt can't penetrate in there. So by scaling the fish like that, it allows the salt to penetrate the whole fish and cure it for you.
All right. Next question would be on butterflying. Are you cutting out any middle bones and cutting that away? Or are you just cutting a flap so that one side flaps? What tell me more specifically how you butterfly a cob mullet, please.
So I start by I fillet or I scale the mullet, then I fillet the one side. I don't pull the fillet off. I switch over to the other side. I scale the other side, and I fillet right around the top of the neck. There's a piece that connects the two fillets together, and it should look like almost like you got two fillets connected with a piece at the top and making it look like a butterfly. Is what the old timey guys would do it like that, and that's how they would have the mullet like that. And what we would do is that at the shop, before we would put them in the box in the mix, we would hang them on a rod, and that way we could just hang the butterfly on the rod and get them all done, so you wouldn't have to do 3 at a time, 4 at a time. I would fillet like 50 cob corn mullet, and then do 50 all at once and stack them. So I'm not having 3 or 4 salt cut mullet, 3 or 4 salt cut mullet. I would butterfly 50 mullet, and then I would salt them, and then go again. Scale 50 more, fillet them more, and then go and keep moving.
All right, and now if you would please explain to me, like, what exactly is the benefit of salting these cob mullet? Like, what exactly is the effect of it, and how does it benefit the angler?
So I don't only salt the cob mullet. I salt the finger mullet too. And it makes it tougher. Pretty much, you're trying to get rid of a little bit of the water in the muscles, and you're trying to give it a little bit of a tougher fish. So say you get up in the fall and you catch a bunch of mullet in the fall, and you go ahead and you salt it and you package it and you put it in the freezer, and come the springtime you get that bait out, and you let it thaw out. If you haven't done it right, when you put the hook on that mullet and you go to throw it out there, the body's going to break off and you're going to be left with a head. So if you don't do it right, it'll turn your bait into paper mache pretty much.
And does it extend the life of the bait? Is that the other benefit we're doing?
Yes, it extends the life of the bait and allows you to have like cut bait in the spring when you just don't have it. Like if you get into a school of fish in the spring and they just want they want one specific thing, and you've got it, it's definitely going to help. It also gives you variety too. If you say, hey, we're gonna fish a little bit of crust, a little bit of shrimp, a little bit of this, but having a little bit of cut mullet is always good to have along, and that's why it's good to, like I said, get them in the fall, brine them, and then keep them to the spring. It's always a good bet. So you're not sitting there buying bait in the spring. It does help.
So if I'm fishing for a long weekend, or if I'm fishing for a week, and whether I catch cob mullet and salt them myself, or I go to the local tackle shop and I'm fortunate enough that they have salted cob mullet to buy, like once I've bought it, once it's not frozen or freshly salted, what's the lifespan of that bait?
I would say I would at least use it within 6 months.
I could leave it in a 5-gallon bucket for 6 months and use it.
Yes, and we've actually had back when we ran the shop down at CB there, we would keep mullet from the fall all the way through the spring and into the middle of the summer. It's kind of when we'd run out again, and then we'd stop with, once again, the fall mullet would come again, and we would do it again. But we would bag up and put away like 6 or 7 5-gallon buckets full of cob mullet and go through it all. Sometimes guys would come in there and just take the whole bucket. That's a lot of mullet. But you've got big groups of guys all going up somewhere. They don't want to be without bait. They don't want to have to go and source that bait where they go to. They just want that. They want the bait there and now. So
just to make sure I'm understanding, no freezing, no refrigeration, I'll still get up to 6 months.
Yes, as long as you keep it in that salt bucket, that's fine. Yes, if you want to put it in your freezer, you can. Now your finger mullet, I would, even though they've been salted and brined, I would still freeze them. But the cut salted mullet does not need to be frozen. No.
All right, I don't know if I'm asking you a trade secret here, but what's the salt that you prefer? Or what salt would you recommend? Okay. We can go that way.
This is your freebie right here, Gary. When you use salt, it's very important that you only use one type of salt. If you use salt, regular salt that has iodine in it, when you go to make your batch, your mullet will come out yellow because it's the iodine in the water, in the salt. So when you go to salt your fish, make sure you have regular salt with no iodine in it. Kosher salt works the best, but it doesn't matter what it really is, as long as there's no iodine in the salt. you're good to go. Now, it's not going to do anything bad to the fish, but its presentation is everything, and you don't want a bunch of yellow silver mullet. So,
Is there? I think we're coming to the end of our. Thank you very much for that freebie. I'll take it, and I'm sure everyone's grateful. And I'm actually a little disappointed that you didn't offer that, and I had to ask you since it's such a key detail about iodine. But aside from that, friend Ryan, anything else to talk about Cobb mullet before we maybe move on to the next topic?
like I said, there's such a large amount of bait that time of year. Like I said, it's a boom for fishermen in the fall, just because with that much amount of food close to the beach like that, you're going to get all kinds of predators, after that, and it makes some of the best surf fishing around is the fall around here for us, just because. I mean, live mullet, fresh mullet, cut mullet. I mean, you can catch anything in the surf from. I mean, I watch you guys catch a cobia at the point one time at Wrightsville Beach, just on a small finger mullet. I mean, so there's all kind of stuff you can catch. It doesn't, you're not just because it's a mullet doesn't mean like, hey, I'm just going to I might catch a redfish or flounder. I mean, like I said, I watch this guys catch a pretty big cobia just in the inlet there, just fishing for drum. So it does happen.
Okay. So my next question is actually not about a bait species that we talked about sort of setting up the show.
Yeah.
And I haven't asked yet. So why is it that Ryan Glass isn't prepared to talk about pogies? How come pogies aren't on your list?
So the problem with pogies is that they don't do well. They just don't do that as well as the mullet do in the brine. They tend to come apart pretty easily. They're pretty thin. Even when you brine them down, their life is not as good as the mullet. They don't look as good when they thaw out. They're good now. If you're going to say, hey, I'm going to catch some pogies here this weekend and I'm going to use them by next week, I'm not going to freeze them, then that would be fine. But if you're going to try and keep them over until the spring, I would not mess with the pogies as far as that goes. You can use them for something else. You can use them for chum. You can use them for other stuff. But as far as like for cut bait, they don't hold up as well as the mullet do when they're salted.
So as far as the bait, you're not a hater on their productivity. It is more their viability to sell. I mean, again, you're a commercial bait fisherman, but even recreational, Ryan. Like you'll use a pogie that day on the boat, but
yes.
We're not using a pogie beyond that day on the boat.
No. I prefer on that if I get the boat.
Okay. In the part one, we talked about sand fleas. We talked about other crabs. We talked about killifish. Does anything else get your attention in the fall other than finger mullet and cob mullet? I mean, I'm sure sand fleas come back into it.
Sand fleas come back into it, and so does shrimp come back to it in the fall. And the shrimp, I will also add. If I'm fishing shrimp in the surf, I will salt that shrimp just because it makes it a little bit tougher and it holds it on the hook just a little bit better. And I just need to hold on just a little bit longer. When you've got a bunch of small fish pecking at your stuff in the surf, it's nice to have something that's just a little bit tougher. They eventually will get it. I'm not saying they're not going to, but if I can hold it on the hook an extra 30 seconds, then that's what I'm going to do.
All right, let's talk about shrimp then. Where are you finding, and I don't know, maybe I don't see them that much in the Wrightsville Beach area. Am I just not looking in the right spot?
They are in the creeks in the late summer you run into that whole problem again. You can throw your net in the creeks, but the chance of you destroying your net's pretty high. So sometimes I'll have a junk net, like an older net that I've stitched about a couple thousand times, and I will walk up in the creeks and I will throw a net up there to catch some shrimp. Otherwise, it's just as easy go to the seafood house and get some fresh shrimp and then just salt it yourself.
So I live on Howe Creek, and I would describe that as a relatively shallow creek, and I hardly ever see them. But again, it might be my limitation, not the shrimp presence in the creek. But I feel like, say a buddy that lives on Whiskey Creek, a deeper creek, has better luck with shrimp. Is that the connection? Is that it? Like deeper water creeks tend to attract more shrimp, or what is the habitat? And again, I'm not asking you to speak about Ocean Isle or Morehead City, but Wrightsville Beach.
They do like the shrimp do like a soft bottom. They do like to be further up the creek. where the mud is really soft. So maybe where you are, it's not as the ground's not as soft. Maybe if you would head up further up your creek, you would find more shrimp. That's the case with me in Pages. I live on Pages, and in the front of the creek in the summertime, you'll find one or two. But the further you go back up the creek, the more shrimp you're going to find. But also again, the more oyster bars and oyster stuff you're going to find too. So you are going to run into that problem. But we do get them in the fall time of year in the creeks. Those creeks and the creeks close to the Wrightsville Beach too. We find some ones in and around Offabanks Channel is pretty good too. But yes, Deepwater Creek and the mud definitely matters. They don't like that white sandy bottom. They do like that fluff mud, dark mud bottom.
All right. So now, if we are fortunate enough to throw the cast net and get some shrimp, I guess just walk me through, like, step by step, like what you would do to take care of that shrimp so that it had the most integrity the next time you wanted to use it.
Okay. First of all, I would pop the heads off of the shrimp, because that's generally what goes first. If you're ever buying shrimp from a dealer and they've got the heads still on, if the head sits up nice and firm, nice and straight, it looks nice and straight when you hold it up, the back of the shrimp, that shrimp is pretty fresh. If you hold that shrimp up and that head falls down like that, and you can see the crease back behind the head, and there's a bit of a darkness color around the neck and the face, you know those shrimp are going to be at least 4 or 5 days old. So if I'm getting shrimp and I know I'm going to use them for bait, the first thing I'm going to do is pop the head off, because it's going to rot from the top down. So I'm going to pop the heads off. I'm going to get an ice bath going, just like I do for my finger mullet, and I'm going to put them in that salt slush bath for a couple hours. It doesn't have to be as long as the mullet, but just a couple hours would be fine.
And so if you're packaging the shrimp, you're putting them in, you're vacuum sealing them, and like, I guess, you can single serving sizes, not a single shrimp, but like single half-day serving sizes.
So what I do is, like, I try not to bag them. You don't need to vacuum seal them. You can vacuum seal them if you want to. The Ziploc bags, freezer Ziploc bags work just as well. As long as you get all the air out of the bags, you'll be fine. And I try not to bag too many in a bag. If I'm going fishing, I don't want to waste a whole bunch of shrimp. So if I might put like maybe 30 shrimp in a bag, and so if I know that it's early season, or depending what time of year it is, I can grab the bag of shrimp. I don't have to worry about wasting a whole bag of shrimp. What I've got to do is, if I go through my 30, then I can pull out another bag and another bag. So I don't put too many in one bag. I just kind of break it apart like that.
So and we're coming to the end of the podcast, and so this might be a good way to sort of transition to the end of it. So with finger mullet or cod mullet or shrimp, or maybe something I'm not thinking of, is any of those more susceptible to, if I were to vacuum seal and freeze, it would bring the quality of the bait down, and I would just as soon not do that?
No, I mean, vacuum sealing is going that extra mile. Like, you can definitely do it if I was just for recreational purpose. You can vacuum seal. It just becomes expensive more than anything else. And those gallon Ziploc bags or the quart Ziploc bags will work just as well. As far as you're not going to be keeping it for 5, 6, 7 years. You're only going to be keeping it for 12 months. So if that, maybe 9 months. So those, you don't have to go the one route. You can if you want to, but it's not a necessity.
We are basically at the end. I'm going to say, you got any other fall bait you want to give a nod to that we haven't yet?
I mean, the shops sell all kinds of stuff. Other stuff will work. And if you've got kids and stuff like that, you surf fishing, squid is one of the best to use, because it doesn't come off the hook every time you put it on. So if you are, depending on who you're fishing with, if you're fishing with your friends, you might fish one way. But if you've got a bunch of kids, fishing in the surf, we don't really get squid around here too much, but it does work for bait, and it does help if you're not trying to rebait the hook every 5 minutes for the kids. So that would be one thing I would advise. All
right, and then the final question is, man, anything else, man? Any final thoughts to wrap up this, part 2 of a 2-part series? Again, sourcing and caring for seasonal bait. I mean, it's been another great episode, but I just hate to say goodbye without giving you that chance.
And like I said, it's been enjoyable to speak about. Like I said, I enjoyed talking about the bait and the seasonal stuff. So, but I think you've hammered pretty much all of it here these last 2 times, whether it be in the spring and the summer. So it's been enjoyable, but I can't think of any more. If you can, there are any more questions you can ask, but I think that's it for me.
All right, that's good for me too, man. Ryan, again, thank you so much for sharing your insights, sharing your knowledge, man. I think, these are going to be very popular podcasts and very useful, man. I mean, and that's part of the focus of these is actually trying to help people catch more fish more often. And what better way than getting them dialed in on bait?
Okay, thanks, Gary.
You got it. David Harden.
Hey, Gary. That was a lot of great information.
Yeah, man, he makes me work, man, because there's so much information. We're like going back and forth at a quicker pace than maybe some of my other Southern captains that talk slower. I'm tired.
Are you gonna be all right?
I'm gonna be all right.
Are you gonna be all right? Okay.
I'm smarter. I'm bait smarter. That's for sure.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, my takeaway for that one is really kind of a pragmatic approach to not buying a cast net every year. Is to really be careful about where you throw it. Even if you're tempted to throw it, if you see a school of mullet and there's oysters over there, it's like, don't throw the cast net in the oysters.
And when you're throwing a cast net, what size cast net are you throwing?
So I've got, mine is a little bigger and I'm not good at it. So I should probably go to a smaller size like Ryan suggested. It's like a six footer.
You should go down to a 6 footer?
Yeah.
Jesus, I don't throw anything bigger than a 6 footer. Every year at my fishing school, I say I'm going to focus on 8 foot nets, and then I just don't do it, and I just throw a 6 footer all year.
Yeah, that's what I need to do.
Yeah, you need to get a 4 foot because if you're throwing it inside, then you can maybe more closely hug that oyster bar without hitting that oyster bar. I mean, that's why I use a smaller net is just to hit some smaller pockets, a little bit better control.
All right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it this spring. Before we go, let's thank our sponsors, Port City Signs and Graphics, YourBoatMoney.com, and New Coast and Marine Warehouse Center. If you would like to sponsor the podcast, just contact the Fisherman's Post office and we will hook you up.
And again, man, those sponsors make what we do possible. It just wouldn't be possible to do the podcast without our sponsorship support. So if you're a fan of the podcast, I hope you appreciate their efforts. Let them know, spend money with them. Tell them you appreciate them, whatever it is, because, we enjoy doing the podcast and we want to keep it going. And thank you, sponsors. And then finally, again, member content. You want early access to the podcast. You want to hear the 12 to 20 minutes we talk a little bit more with Ryan Glass about fall and late summer bait. Then just become a premium content member. You'll also get weekly fishing reports and access to the fishing school video library.
Sounds good to me.
All right, David. Thanks again.